Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. One of the most fascinating conversations to have as it relates to this South Carolina program is what's this 2026 recruiting class going to look like for South Carolina? Hey, why is it so important? Why is the opportunity for South Carolina to sign one of the best classes in program history? Why is it so important specifically in the 2026 cycle? Well, I would argue it's about staying power. I think Shane Beamer in South Carolina showed in 2024 that they can be one of the best programs in the conference. I fully expect them to do that in 2025 as well. Well, can you translate that momentum on the football field to the recruiting trail? Because if you want to stay at the top of this conference, it starts with the Jimmies and Joes. It starts with recruiting guys that look like Georgia players and Alabama players. Can South Carolina translate that success to the high school recruiting ranks? That's a massive question. Now, I want to get more into why it's so important for South Carolina, specifically in 2026, to make that happen. Talk about, hey, if South Carolina does sign a special class in 2026, who are the players that are probably signing their papers with South Carolina? At least in my opinion, want to highlight some of the best players that are on South Carolina's boards. Before we get into it, as always, to the South Carolina fans, it's been a blast talking this football team in spring practice. Been a blast talking this football team on the recruiting trail. The amount of going to be a blast talking this football team in 2025. The amount of support that y'all have shown the boys has been amazing. Appreciate you guys. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. And, chances are, if you're a South Carolina fan watching this particular episode, you probably got some more names that you would like to see South Carolina go out and get in 2026. Let it fly in the comment section. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. Without further ado, let's get into it. Now, again, I think it's most important for the staying power. You look at the teams, and I know I'll start with this actually. Let me backtrack a little bit and say I'm not always super concerned with the high school recruiting rankings for this South Carolina program because I think they're one of the best evaluating programs under Shane Beamer in the country. And what I mean by that is, hey, the best players for South Carolina, the guys that have gone really, really high in the NFL draft, they haven't always been the guys that had 4 and 5 stars next to their name. I think South Carolina's ability to not only evaluate talent, but get talent into their program and develop in the right way, it really speaks volumes. I think Nick Anwinari is probably the best example, right? 3-star prospect, freaky athlete, but 3-star prospect, comes to South Carolina, becomes a top 50 NFL draft pick. Number 2, I think South Carolina has suddenly become a program that is really checking all the boxes that these high school kids are looking for when they're looking at programs at the next level. Look, I'm not going to pretend like NIL and the finances of these recruitments don't exist. And I think South Carolina is very competitive when it comes to NIL, especially in some of these recruitments. But I will say this, there are other things that these kids look for. Number 1, can you compete at the highest level? South Carolina has shown they can. Not something South Carolina has historically always shown. Number 2, the development. The development of these guys on this roster, the homegrown talent that South Carolina has recruited out of the high school ranks, been really, really impressive. And then number 3, I mean, they're playing young talent. And I think that matters. And that's something that a lot of other programs can't often sell. I mean, you saw Dylan Stewart be probably, outside of Colin Simmons, probably the most, or probably outside of Jeremiah Smith too. Dylan Stewart was one of the most dominant true freshmen that we saw in the entire country. Lenore Sellers was a 3-star prospect that we knew was really raw coming out of high school, dominated the SEC in the month of November as a redshirt freshman at quarterback. Josiah Thompson was arguably the most impressive starting tackle that we saw as a true freshman across the entire country. You're seeing South Carolina play young talent. These kids at the high school ranks are looking at South Carolina and saying, hey, players that are only 1 or 2 years older than me are out there winning football games at a high level as 18-year-old kids playing a massive role in it. I look at South Carolina and say, hey, what other boxes can you possibly check off in terms of being an attractive program to these kids out of the high school ranks? Nonetheless, having a head coach in Shane Beamer, that's probably one of the most charismatic dudes in the sport. All that to say that it seems like it's a crucial year for South Carolina to capitalize on all those things we just talked about. There's so much momentum around this program. If you want to continue to win games at the highest level in this conference, the best way to do it is parlay that success to the recruiting trail, all to come into one of my favorite conversations. And that is, hey, let's rank the guys that are quote unquote must get dudes. Hey, what would it look like if South Carolina goes out and signs the best class in program history? Look, I know there's a long ways to go. There is a pathway that you can see South Carolina doing this, and I think it starts with four-star quarterback Landon Duckworth. This should probably not come as a surprise. And look, I'm a really big fan of the quarterback room South Carolina has. Lenore Sellers, a redshirt sophomore. Aaron Nolan's a redshirt freshman. Cutter Woods, it sounds like this program really likes as a true freshman. I think they got a lot of young quarterbacks that I think have some big time upside over the next couple of years. If you were to ask me, hey, who would be the heir apparent to Lenore Sellers? I'm looking at Landon Duckworth. I think he has the ability to be the difference maker that we saw Lenore Sellers be over the 2024 year. I think Landon Duckworth has a very, very similar set of skills. He's not necessarily the same kind of quarterback as Lenore Sellers. Lenore Sellers he ain't. It's very hard to find a quarterback that you can compare to Lenore Sellers because quarterbacks just normally don't look like that. But Landon Duckworth's ability to throw off platform, to get creative outside the pocket, to be a really good quarterback when things aren't always perfect. That was the thing we loved the most about Lenore Sellers. Hey, it didn't need to be perfect for Lenore Sellers to make it happen. Landon Duckworth, very similar kind of player with the athletic skill set that he brings to the table, not to mention a very, very talented arm. And to me, he's like that catalyst. If South Carolina does sign an elite class in 2025, he's probably the one that's kind of lighting the fire. Took a visit to Auburn last weekend. Everything we're hearing is still South Carolina's kind of in the driver's seat. And even I think a lot of South Carolina fans, when they saw that Auburn visit, I think we all thought the same thing. All right, well, Auburn's going to make a significant pitch on the NIL front. It sounds like South Carolina is going to be as competitive as anybody in the country on the NIL side of things for Landon Duckworth. And look, South Carolina has shown the ability to be competitive as anybody in the country. Guy like Dylan Stewart or a guy like Nick Harbor a couple of years ago. How about retaining all of the young talent that no doubt were getting reached out? I'm talking about Josiah Thompson. I'm talking about Dylan Stewart. I'm talking about Lenore Sellers. You think those guys weren't getting some calls in December? South Carolina has shown they can compete at the highest level when it comes to NIL, and I think Landon Duckworth's one of those guys that they are going to be quote unquote all in for, responsibly all in for. Number 2, Darius Gray. And this one has been kind of a crazy recruitment to follow, where in the spring it sounded like there were some real legs to South Carolina in this recruitment. That buzz has kind of faded. It sounds like LSU's probably the team to beat. It sounds like Ohio State has asserted themselves in this recruitment as well. Last official visit weekend, guess who's on campus for South Carolina? It's going to be Darius Gray. Can you capitalize on that last opportunity before this kid probably commits to get him on campus and sell him to South Carolina? Again, I think what you're selling is look at the success that these young guys have had for South Carolina on the offensive line. You're going to get an opportunity to play. And I think what's special about Darius Gray, this is just kind of my take on the football player. One, he's about of a blue chip offensive lineman as you can find. It's really hard to project offensive linemen from the high school ranks to the collegiate ranks. The projection ain't easy. Wherever Darius Gray goes, he's going to be a multi-year starter, whether it's Ohio State, whether it's LSU, whether it's South Carolina, and he's a guy that's ready to play early. I think he's probably number 2. If you're talking about a special class for South Carolina, I think Darius Gray is probably that number 2 guy you're looking for. Number 3, I'm going to go a little off-road here. Talk about JB Shubaz. And for the South Carolina fans this is getting a little bit more nitty gritty, right? Landon Duckworth, Darius Gray, they kind of highlight the national media attention. This kid freaking rocks. He's not as day one ready as Darius Gray, but you talk about boxes you want to see checked for SEC starting tackles. JB Shubaz checks them all. I think he's a really good athlete for this size, and he carries the weight really well too. Now, technically, there's a lot of work to be done in the stance with the hand placement. He moves really well. He's got a ton of horsepower to his game, can move people off the line of scrimmage, which is going to be important for South Carolina. South Carolina wants to run the football. Shane Beamer made that very clear in the 2024 year. This guy can be a people mover up front for South Carolina. Probably not going to get on the football field as early as a guy like Darius Gray, as a guy like Josiah Thompson did last year. I think he has the opportunity to be one of the best tackles in the SEC. Number 3 on the list, give me PJ Dean. Great football player, even better fit for South Carolina. Again, this is a heavy hitter recruitment, right? Georgia, Ohio State, South Carolina. Those are the top 3. And kind of gets back to the point of, hey, if South Carolina wants to assert themselves as a program to beat in the SEC, these are, and you're not going to win every single name we talk about. We're talking about the top 7 guys I want to see South Carolina sign. You ain't going to go 7 for 7. But you talk about the staying power, you got to land a few of these guys, at least in my opinion. PJ Dean, he's a freaking rock star. And he's a guy that we thought was going to play on the offensive lines and making that transition as a defensive lineman. Changed the body. His body looks just night and day different from what it looked like as a junior, as an offensive lineman. Why is he perfect? Because he's that undersized, hyper-athletic defensive lineman that South Carolina's had a ton of success with. Most notably TJ Sanders. South Carolina wants penetrators. They want guys that are not necessarily 325, 330-pound two-gappers. They want guys that might be a little bit smaller, but that can win with their athleticism, penetrate behind the line of scrimmage, and go create negative plays. That's how this South Carolina defense is built. And PJ Dean's one of the best penetrating defensive linemen that you see. Probably ain't ever going to be a guy that goes 320 pounds. Probably going to hover around 290 to 300. That's the kind of body type that South Carolina has had the most success with in the middle of that defensive line. And once again, you're selling player development. You're selling TJ Sanders to a guy like PJ Dean. Number 5 on the list, I'm going to go Carter Meadows, DMV cat. South Carolina has had a ton of success with kids from the DMV. Now, I think some South Carolina fans are looking at me and saying, hey, 5-star dude, fringe 5-star dude, why is he so low on the list? Why is he number 5? For Carter Meadows, I think there's a lot of projection there. Dylan Stewart stepped on campus and was immediately a guy for South Carolina. And we kind of had a feeling he had the opportunity to immediately be a guy for South Carolina when he was coming out of high school. I think Carter Meadows probably has a year or two, but before he's right, kind of like a guy like Desmond Yu from a couple classes ago. Love the upside. The upside is about as high as anybody in the country, but probably going to need a year or two, and the projections are a little bit more murky. South Carolina's had a lot of success in the DMV area. Obviously, guys like Dylan Stewart and obviously guys like Nick Harbor. Can Carter Meadows be that next guy? Is probably the conversation. And once again, the heavy hitter recruitment that we talk about, how about Samari Matthews? Once again, a position that I think South Carolina has done a really good job evaluating and really good job developing. One of the more polished cornerbacks that you see in the 2026 cycle. And what I mean by that is this kid is technically very, very good. And he's got the physical traits too. He's 6'1", 190 pounds, looking like he's got to be pushing 33-inch arms. Got a lot of length, and he's going to use that length at the line of scrimmage. He's going to put his hands on wide receivers. Really smooth kid. Can operate in press man coverage. Really good in zone, keeping his eyes on the quarterback. Box checking cornerback that you kind of know. Kind of like how we talked about Darius Gray. You kind of know Samari Matthews is going to make it work at the collegiate ranks because he's just too good of a football player not to. Last name I'll talk about, Amari Thomas, and this is more of just a personal take. I would like to see South Carolina recruit the running back position a little bit better. It's a program that has produced a lot of good running backs, but you feel like it's a little bit reliant on the transfer portal. Why can't South Carolina grab, some of the better backs in the country? It's a program that wants to run the football. It's a program that has done a good job recruiting the offensive line. Amari Thomas, a guy, he averaged, 11.2 yards per carry his junior year. A little bit smaller, a little bit more wiry, makes people miss at a high level, and has a body where you can put on weight the right way. And that's another thing I'd kind of put for pretty clear how I feel about South Carolina. I think I've made it pretty clear. Amari Thomas is a guy that South Carolina's done a really good job changing body types, in the weight room. And if you get Amari Thomas's body right and you kind of fill out that lower half, put a little bit more good weight on him, I think he can be a really good football player because he's got some burners and he's very, very smooth as a runner. It feels big. It feels like this is kind of I don't know if I'd say fork in the road because, look, if South Carolina signs the 20th best class in the country, I still think South Carolina's probably going to be fine. But I think this 2026 class this summer, to me, represents an opportunity for Shane Beamer to take that step with this program. It's probably the best way. I wish I started it with that because that sounded super smooth. This is an opportunity for Shane Beamer to take a step with the South Carolina program. I think it starts with 2026 cycle. We will close it out there. Those are the 7 names that I would like to see South Carolina go out and land. Are we going to go 7 for 7? No, probably not. Can you get 3 of them? And you're talking about a really good class if you kind of sprinkle in some other names. And we all know South Carolina likes to close with some fireworks. We'll close it there. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel, and we'll talk to y'all later. Peace.